Welcome to the Reversion to the Mean podcast, hosted by Justin Castelli of RLS Wealth Management and Kevin of ferventfinance.com. On Reversion to the Mean, Justin and Kevin will discuss the week's top financial Twitter shares and distill them down to what's necessary and what's noise. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed on this podcast should be considered professional advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts are theirs and theirs only.
Welcome to episode 37 of Reversion to the Mean. I want to kick it off by congratulating Tiger for winning his 15th major and 5th Masters. It's been quite a while. I've already seen the jokes coming out on Twitter. Bitcoin wasn't around when he won his last major and things like that. But, if you're into sports and seeing people excel at what their craft is, I don't know how you're not excited for Tiger.
I didn't watch it. I'll tell you why I didn't watch it in a second, but I am glad to see Tiger back on top for a couple of reasons. I think in sports, there are certain times where the sport is at its best when there are certain teams or athletes that are performing very well. So I think golf is at its best when Tiger's in the hunt and actually competitive. I think the NBA is at its best when like the New York Knicks are good and the LA Lakers, like the teams we grew up with and those historic teams. I think when those teams are doing good, things are better for sports. So it's good to see Tiger back. The other reason I'm glad to see him win is so many people were kicking him when he was down. Nobody's perfect. Yeah, he had his stuff he went through, and you figure out the physical stuff, the mental stuff, which golf is a very mental game. I'm glad to see him back on top and wearing the red on Sunday. But I did not watch it because, one, I think watching golf is very boring, and I don't understand the obsession with how excited people get about the Masters, like watching it all weekend long. The other reason is I decided to take a nap with Silas, which was the best hour spent. So while you watched golf and whatever you did while you watched that, I put Silas down for a nap, and he had this big bean bag in his room, and I just laid there with him and fell asleep with him. It was awesome. It's a crappy day here. It's cold and rainy, so it was a good nap day, and I decided to nap with Silas while you watched Tiger do his thing.
You can't beat that.
And we won't let the congratulations end there. I need to give you a big congratulations on passing the CFP designation. You get your results this week, which was no surprise. I know you were nervous about it, but I knew there's no way that you would have failed it. So congratulations to that. Now you've got 3 years before you can actually use it, right?
Well, maybe not.
Yeah, your CPA stuff counts towards it, right?
Yeah, I have some accounting work that should count towards it. Yeah, and of course, this podcast should count as well, right?
Totally. This should definitely be CE. So my question to you is: do you start adding the CFP designate or the credentials after your name, even though you're really not going to be using it right now?
No, I probably won't.
All right. Well, let's get into this week's stuff. This is Kevin's episode. I was slacking this week on our Slack channel and putting stuff in there, and Kevin set us up a good outline for the week. So let's first talk about this piece that was was it the New Yorker or the New York? It was about what it's like to grow up with more money than you'll ever spend. Abigail Disney, and yes, of that Disney family. So what'd you think of this?
Yeah, so Abigail Disney is the granddaughter of Roy Disney, who co-founded the Walt Disney Company. And she's 59 right now, and she was interviewed kind of about money and how it affected her growing up. Just a little bit about her background. I guess when she was young, her parents were obviously well off, but they weren't mega rich yet. She said their house was a nice house, but it wasn't anything ridiculous. But once she became a young adult, it seems like in her early 20s, and her parents got into their 50s, that's when they became mega rich. Her father purchased a 737 airplane for the family, and they'd fly private all the time. And she kind of got to see how money affected her parents. And I think the way she describes it is in a fairly negative way, where it kind of changed how her parents acted, and it doesn't really seem like she liked how they changed as a result of the money. But we were talking briefly before this. It's just a tough interview to do, right? She says she could be worth $1 billion if she wanted to, but she's given a lot of money away, and she's done some other things that haven't compounded her wealth like she could have if she wanted to. But it's kind of tough, and she tries to relate to us normal folks, and discussing and how she doesn't fly private anymore because she felt like you're just so removed from society and just the normal person if you don't have to go sit on a jumbo jet with 150 other people or wait in the airport with other people. So she claims she doesn't fly private anymore. But I just found the whole aspect of how, emotionally the money changed her family, and how she kind of didn't change like they did. And it seems like, kind of it brought some separation there, which is unfortunate. But yeah, money definitely affects people differently.
You mentioned we were talking about offline. I agree that I thought she handled the interview very well. I don't think she came across as a spoiled brat or anything along those lines. But there were a few questions that, she's talking about having the house with 2 doorbells and getting, double rings on Halloween, and like it almost sets up like, oh, you're gonna hate this person because they have money and they don't understand it. But then you read about how much money she's given away, and that, she also admitted the fact that it's easy to gain wealth when you start out with it. So that's what she's talking about, not being a billionaire. Like she said, it's easy when you already have money to make more money. You think about compound interest and things of that sort. I really did think it's interesting the focus that she had on the plane. Like that was obvious. Like I'm not a shrink, but if I was, if I was sitting down with her like that, there's something very big and it's deeper about the plane than just the fact that her parents bought a plane. And that's when she noticed the change within her family dynamic, because she kept on coming back to it, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know what it means, but I noticed that came back. And I also thought it was interesting, her perception of how what flying private, and here we keep talking about it, but flying private means as far as not having to wait and not exhibiting patience and just being able to walk right in and go. I just thought that was a very interesting observation that she had. I don't know if I would have picked up on that, of kind of the spoiledness of not having to do all that, rather than just being spoiled and having this luxury of a queen bed in a plane and flying around the country whenever you want. But I thought it was pretty good. I think the other thing this shows is that, money doesn't necessarily bring happiness. I don't think she came across as unhappy, but I do think that the 2 families she grew up with, her younger, the family she had when she was younger, and then the family she had when they got ultra rich, that separation, I do think that she probably longs for the days when they didn't have as much money. It sounds like the relationship with her family was probably better. So I think it's kind of interesting to see, and good as a reminder to see, even people who have all of that money, it doesn't necessarily make their lives better or happy. We all have our own problems. Money can make it a little bit easier and maybe alleviate some of those issues. But when you start getting to family relationships and the higher quality things in life that money really doesn't fix, that dollar doesn't matter at all. So I thought it was a good piece.
I agree there. Our next piece is from our buddy Douglas, titled "Make It Easy." And first off, I just want to point out that Douglas leases a car. What do you think about that?
I have no problems with leasing. I know I think that goes to the rent versus buying a home. I think under right circumstances and personality types, I like the way new cars look. I don't drive very much. I've thought about in the future leasing a car because I would be well under the mileage. I could get a car, and my personality is I like to have change and new things. So I'm not the type of person who's going to drive a car for 15 years. So I know that, and that's fine. I build my plan around that, and as long as I can afford it. So I'm not anti-leasing. I'm anti-leasing where you get yourself upside down because of mileage and you're just doing it because you want a nicer car for a smaller payment. But if you're doing it with intent, and every few years you'd like to have a new car, it's always under warranty, you don't have to worry about that stuff. A car's a depreciating asset anyway. I'm not against it. So I'm going to defend Douglas on this one.
Yeah. So in this piece, he discusses how they were upgrading the family SUV, and they went to one dealership and they knew the exact car they wanted to get, but the dealership's sales process was just so antiquated, and they didn't put the customer first, and they were sitting around and no one could really actually sell them the car or lease it to them. And so they kind of, walked away from that dealership and found another dealership where the customer was first. They went in and they were in and out in an hour, and they just thought it was a great process. And I can relate to this. About a year and a half ago, I bought a car, and the first dealership I went to, I knew the exact car I wanted. So I get there and I want to test drive it, and they couldn't find the car. It's on their website. The guy looks at their, inventory. He's like, we have it, but they couldn't find it. So he's like, okay, drive this other car that's similar to the one that you want to buy. So right off the bat, I'm kind of like, what's going on? And then we get inside, and they can't really, like, they don't give you like a price that the car is actually going to cost. They want to know all about financing, blah, blah, blah. So I walked away from that one, and I was just kind of pissed off. And I go to the second dealership. Second dealership is, here's the car. It's all, they had it all washed, and it was ready to go. They had a sheet of paper that said, here's the cost of the car. Here's how much it's going to be to, the license and registration fees. And at the end of the day, here's the price, and that's what it is. And like, it was just so like such a fluid process. They're very transparent. So I ended up going with that car, even though it wasn't my first choice, just because the dealership experience was that much better. And Douglas compares that to, the financial planning business, and how, transparency is important, putting the customer first is important, and relying on old systems just because that's the way you've done it forever is probably not the right way to go about it.
Well, the thing about, making it easier for the client or for the customer is that's something that is completely in our control as the business or as the service provider.
Mm-hmm.
So to your experience, the car dealership can completely control how they treat you and the experience you have. They control every factor of it. Same thing with me and my clients. I can control everything about our relationship. I can't control the markets. I can't control all these other things, but I can control that. So it seems silly that if you want to build a successful business, you're not doing those little things right and making the experience good for people and creating loyal customers and fans. So I think that makes total sense, trying to grow a business and doing that. And there's actually a book, Danny Meyer, who started Shake Shack, or one of the people who started Shake Shack. It's called Setting the Table, and it's all about like customer service and putting the customer first and doing right by them. So if anybody out there is a business owner and you really want to be successful, focus on treating your customers and clients like gold, and you'll probably be pretty successful. And the next step beyond that, I would say, is treat your employees just the same way. You take care of your employees, you take care of the clients. I don't care what you're selling, you should be in good shape.
The next piece is from Bloomberg, and it's Homebuying Startups Keep Raising Money in Softer Housing Markets. And I kind of knew Zillow was doing this, but I haven't heard of some of these other startups. But basically, these home buying startups are going around and using algorithms to purchase homes from people. So their whole thing is, we'll make the process easier. You don't have to hire an agent and wait around to sell the house, and it's just a more streamlined process. And I would think that you probably aren't. You're not going to get top dollar. I don't think like, the Zillows, and there's Perch and Open Door, and I guess Redfin's starting to do it as well. Like, these guys aren't going to pay you top dollar for your house, but if you're just want to get out and you want to get paid quick, and you don't have to worry about someone else's financing falling through, or something like that kind of blowing up your deal, then I guess this is an option. And these startups are raising quite a bit of money to go around using these algorithms and go to, I'm assuming it can only be in markets where there's a lot of houses, so there's a lot of data, so it's probably in cities specifically. And they'll actually go buy the house, put a little bit of money into it, fixing it up, and then they'll sell it. Now, right away in my mind, that's great right now while things are going well. But what happens if they get stuck with a bunch of houses and they can't sell them, right? So it just seems a little different from the original business model of Zillow to be doing this. These other startups, I guess they're specifically doing it. But I'm kind of curious, how it's going to turn out in the end.
If I had to guess, not well. And I think that sometimes when you start to deviate, especially in the Zillow case, when you start to deviate from your original business model, that's not always a good thing. You're reaching. And I don't know if maybe they're reaching because the core business of Zillow is not as profitable as it was, or it's not as good, and now they need to try to do something else. Or maybe they really see it as a viable option. But to your point, this just, like, not to say that there's a housing peak right now, but this just seems to be something that's not a long-term fix. And to your point about not getting top dollar, of course you're not going to get top dollar because these guys have to make money.
Yeah.
So they're not going to give you premium pay for your house and then try to flip it. They're trying to buy it on the low. It's like if you talk about cars. If I go sell my car or trade my car into the dealer, I know I'm getting less than if I go sell it myself because they've got to be able to make a profit on it when they flip it over. But it's the convenience factor. So you just have to look at that as, I'm going to get less than what I could on my own, but I'm okay accepting that fee because I want to get my money right away.
Mm-hmm.
So I think long term it's not a business that I would have a lot of faith and excitement about, because eventually there's going to be a housing cool down, and maybe not a 2008 type of housing crisis, but it's going to slow down, and they're going to be sitting on these properties, and unless they all of a sudden become property management companies where they're renting these things out, they're going to have this inventory and they're going to be selling them at losses. So it just seems like something that it's not going to have a good ending. I don't think it's going to blow up the system, and it's going to be problematic because these aren't it's not JP Morgan and Citibank and all the big banks doing this. So if these little tech companies blow up down the road because they have too much inventory, somebody's going to get a good deal on those homes at that point. But
Yeah,
I'm not a huge fan.
there's a quote at the end that says, "We view ourselves as a next-gen broker that's automating the closing process. We're not betting on where the market is going. We can do well in any market environment." Now, that last sentence is, I doubt that's the case, but I guess if you're only holding the house for weeks at a time, then your risk isn't as great. But if they're holding, for whatever reason, they start holding these houses for longer, then that's when you can, I think, get yourself into some trouble if
Exactly.
they buy a bunch of them. But
to your point, it's while inventory is moving, you get to hold those houses for a couple of weeks. But if inventory slows, or if buying slows and now you're holding them for longer, if you can't sell the homes because the market's not moving, what's your business? How's your business making money? So Zillow has a backup, but these other companies,
yeah.
I just think that confidence is makes me nervous. I wouldn't want to be doing it. All right, I'll steal this one and I'll intro it. The next one is about the positive impact on our lives when it comes to get rid of debt, and not just from a financial standpoint, but also mentally and emotionally. And when I first read the headline, even before I read it, I was kind of like, well, no joke. If you don't have debt, obviously you're going to have a little bit less worry in your life. But then my next thought was, and maybe I missed it in it, I also would be curious, like, if the type of debt matters in the way we feel. So yeah, if you get rid of student loans, that's going to be a huge burden off your shoulders, and you're going to be feeling pretty good. But I am in no rush to get rid of my mortgage. Like, maybe I'll feel good that one day when I get rid of my mortgage, but I have no problem keeping my mortgage for the rest of the time. That's not a debt that makes me feel concerned. So I would see consumer debt like credit cards and things of that sort, medical bills, but I don't know if all debt being paid off feels as good across the board.
Yeah, it said our study shows that because debt impairs psychological functioning and decision making, which is, I guess it from first glance, it's kind of like, oh, does it really? And they show some stats that, average error rates in the cognitive function tests fell to 4% after debt was paid down compared to 17% before. And it just, I guess in my mind, like they share a few more stats. It's one less thing to worry about, right? If you're worried about A, B, and C, if you get one of those things, you're only worrying about two things now. And, it's less to worry about. And that probably, you sleep better at night. You're not, you're not worrying about having to go to work and earn this extra money or work overtime to pay for this debt that you need to pay down. It's just gone, and you can control on, move on, living your life and not really having to worry about it. So I definitely understand it from that perspective. I'm a little, I don't know if some of these percentages and how people's brains are functioning, changing are, 100% correct, but it's interesting stuff.
I'd be curious to see how they measured like the brain activity and the happiness.
It's kind of weird.
One of the coolest things I've ever seen, that this is a complete sidebar, has nothing to do with our conversation, but I watched a documentary, and I think it was Fed Up is the documentary. And it talks about like the sugar industry and how it works. And so I know how they did their brain operation. They showed an MRI on one side of a brain of somebody that had just done cocaine. And on the other side was the brain and like the activity of somebody who had just eaten sugar. And they were lit up the exact same way. Just thought it was fascinating. So since we're talking about brain and like happiness and stuff, I just thought it was kind of interesting.
You should have saved that for our last piece, but that's all right.
We can bring it back. But and actually, there's a good segue into this next one. So we were talking about paying off debt and having side jobs to be able to pay that. So you also put in an article from New York Times called "The Con of the Side Hustle." Why?
Yeah, so this was an opinion piece. I didn't really agree with everything in it, but I thought it brought up a good topic that we've talked about before when we talked about hustle porn and Gary Vee and kind of like glamorizing the whole work, hustle lifestyle. And this opinion piece talks about, the downsides of that. And I do think, there's downsides now. The typical side hustle job, whether that's, Ubering, or, doing another type of delivery service or bussing tables or things like that. You know, Unfortunately, some people have to rely on that for their primary source of income, and that's not, I don't think that's the main goal of the side hustle. So, this person kind of talks about how, that's a downside to some of these, because some people are relying on them for full-time income, but that's another discussion. But since it's tax day is tomorrow, they talk about how some of these side hustlers, come tax time, they don't realize all the information they're going to need to maintain and track and file during tax time, and it's kind of a burden to them. If they're just making a few bucks, they'll probably, whatever they profit, if they're only doing a little bit of it, they're going to have to pay the TurboTax to file the Schedule C and all that. So I thought it was interesting and something people should think about. Just if you're going to go do a side hustle, make sure you track your revenue and your expenses and things like that, because on top of maybe having a full-time job and then doing a side hustle, you're going to have to be your own bookkeeper too at the end of the day. So it's just another thing to think about.
I've got to imagine that like the Ubers and like at least those type of side hustles, they're issuing 1099s or something. Like they've got to have some type of reporting.
Well, that's just one side of the equation. That's just the revenue
Right.
side for the
Right.
driver,
Oh, yeah.
right?
But yeah, I mean, I thought I did like kind of the part about how having a hustle is glamorized, and it's a very kind of cool word is to have a hustle. But I will say that for the people who are doing these side jobs out of necessity, I have mad respect for them, because there's one thing I can't stand is when people complain about their situation and do absolutely nothing to fix it. So these are people that are, maybe they're struggling because of student loan debt, or their income's not where it needs to be. And then they go out and they find this other opportunity to bring in extra income for their family to provide or to get to that next step. So I do think having a side hustle, or whatever you want to call it, is a good thing. I think, they talked about the amount of time working, and I mean, for some people, some of this stuff is enjoyable. I mean, a lot of the Uber drivers I've had, they appear to enjoy like the conversation and the companionship of the rides. So if you can do something that you enjoy and it brings you extra income, like I don't see any issue with that. And the other thing is, I think if you're thinking of doing a side hustle, you can also sometimes leverage that to get to like another stepping stone. So you've got your career, you've got your CFP designation now, and maybe you want to get into the financial planning world. It's like, I think setting up a side hustle where you are a virtual planner for financial advisors to learn how to put, the planning software together and work with advisors and learn the business while you get paid on the side. I see nothing wrong with that. I think that you got to be careful with the side hustle and not let it become too much time. But I'm a fan of doing little things on the side for a little bit of extra income if it's something you're good at and that you enjoy. And I would not let the extra tax stuff prevent you from doing that. Just be aware of it and be smart about it. But don't say, oh, I'm going to have to do some more tax work. Nah, I'm going to pass on my side hustle. Don't let that be the reason to stop.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Gary V. Jr. Next, our next one is from Ben Carlson. Why we'll never all be happy again. And so just right off the bat, I love pieces like this. So his first chart is how the world has gotten so much better over the past 100 years. And, you see these charts of extreme poverty is like falling off a cliff. Vaccination rates, even as long as you're not looking at Facebook, they're going up tremendously. Child mortality is way down. Literacy is way up. And fortunately, I don't watch cable news at all anymore. I don't go on Facebook, so I don't really see all this news that's like kind of doom and gloom that I guess a lot of people are privy to on a everyday basis for maybe hours at a time. So, that's a change I've made, but I know that some people are still doing that. And you can kind of get a little down with seeing all the bad things going on. And a piece like this will just show you that over time, when you don't look at just specific data points at point in times in history, you actually look at the change over the course of history, and lots of very important things are improving. So Ben kind of points all that out and discusses how he thinks that social media has a lot to do with it. Cable news has a lot to do with it. I think a lot of these news sites, where they used to get a lot of their revenue from selling ads in their actual newspapers that they'd sling door to door, are now trying to get clicks from people. And what elicits clicks is doom and gloom news. So it's, it's unfortunate, but as long as you're aware of it, hopefully it, won't affect you negatively. But Ben shared 3 things that he's doing to try to avoid getting, being brought down by this negative news that he sees on a daily basis. And one of the things is what I do: avoid 24/7 cable news at all costs. So that's one thing I've done. Avoid Facebook like the plague. I've deleted my Facebook a few years ago now, and I don't miss it at all, even though I'm on Twitter way too much, but I don't think there's that much negativity, at least with the people we follow on Twitter. And the third thing is easier said than done, is get the negative people out of your life. And like he says, not as easy as it sounds, but that's a goal that he has at his age. What did you think about this?
I thought it was good. And he wrote a piece like this, I think a year or so ago, where he highlighted like 50 reasons things are getting better. And I think there's even a book that highlights this. And it goes through kind of like, it's the stuff we don't think about, the improvement in medicine and things like that you alluded to earlier on. Like we look at like very social things and like specific examples as to why people complain. But then you look at the quality of our lives over time, how much better it's gotten. That's what really matters. But one thing I wanted to point out is that he's got that chart about young people that just kind of stood out to me. And it basically shows internet hours compared to sleep, compared to in-person social interaction and happiness. And you see the internet hours going up and everything else going down. So the more time that kids are spending on internet over time, which as we go further out on the chart is, 2017, 2018, kids are spending more time on the internet. They're less time in person. They're sleeping less, and they're a lot less happy. And that really stood out to me. And we do a pretty good job of keeping the boys off of electronics too much. And I'm lucky that they would rather be outside. Like Roman would play Xbox and play like FIFA and NBA if I'd let him. But like the second it's 45 degrees, they're outside playing basketball and soccer. So I'm real thankful for that, because I don't think that a chart is going to apply to them. And the other thing is I'm like reading stuff like this and realizing there are people that are very upset and doom and gloom, that's kind of what they focus on. I'm so thankful for my mindset that I am naturally an optimistic person, and nobody could ever convince me that life is not good. And I know that that is not something that everybody has, and that's just something that's I'm ingrained with. But when I read this and realize there are a lot of people who are unhappy and only see the negative, I'm so glad that like that is not me, because I don't know how you get out of that other than doing the things that Ben suggested. And I'd like to think that I don't really have any negative people in my life. And I don't think I ever went through and said, I'm cutting you out because you're negative. I just think that maybe because of my optimism, I would annoy a negative person and they would just stay away from me.
Is that why you get blocked on Twitter?
I might be. Yeah. The one time I got blocked, don't even get me started on that crap. Because I got blocked for a positive thing. Anyways, neither here nor there. So I thought it was a good piece. And I think it's good to have these types of pieces from time to time, just to remind us that we are moving forward, regardless of what political views may say and other things, that life is getting better. And we're very fortunate to live today than 100 years ago and beyond.
Definitely agree with you there. And thanks, Ben, for that great piece. So one of our listeners tweeted at us a story from Eater, eater.com, titled "We All Scream." And it's about ultra premium ice cream. And so we've talked about Jenny's a lot on the podcast now, and that's why they shared it with us. Now, I'm not going to lie. This is like basically a book about ice cream. I'm scrolling, and it doesn't end. So I didn't read the whole thing, but I did skim it. And it talks about how ice cream has become this thing where you can charge $10 or $12 a pint and people are actually going to buy it. And that's Jenny's. I think if you buy it off their website, it's like $12 a pint of ice cream, which I admit is ridiculous. But at the end of the day, I can't say at the end of the day, but all ice cream is milk, sugar, and air. And you can't really deviate from that, or it's not going to be ice cream. So all these different companies, you have maybe like the private label ice cream that's going to sell for the cheapest in the grocery store, all the way up to the Jenny's, which is going to sell for $8, $10, $12 a pint. It's all basically the same ingredients and the same techniques and the same machines to make it. Now, obviously, everyone's going to tweak their own little recipe, but it's just one of those things that it's become more of a marketing ploy or scheme to get people to think that their ice cream is just better and worth the premium that you pay. And I found it funny at the end, they were talking about a test where people were taste testing ice cream, and for the most part, And they've done. I know these studies have been done with wine before, and all the people think that they can taste wine and they can tell the expensive bottle from the cheap bottle, and you really can't. The same thing is for ice cream, with the exception of vanilla. So I guess Haagen-Dazs 9 times out of 10 people say it's the best vanilla, but for all the other ice creams, people can't really tell the difference. So, I don't know how I feel about this. I've never, I guess when I travel to a new city and if they have like an ice cream place and I see a Jenny's, I'm probably going to still stop because I just like the experience of it. But I probably won't go to the grocery store and buy a $12 pint of ice cream, especially after reading this article.
The one that I would shout out for expensive ice cream, I think I talked about it after Inside ETFs, is that Cool House. I talked about the ice cream sandwiches, Cool House
Oh, yeah.
Sammys. They're amazing, and they're like $9, and they're worth every penny.
Penny.
Every penny. And there's a difference because this is a frozen ice cream sandwich, and the cookies are yet somehow still pretty soft, and the ice cream is soft. Amazing. So when we were in DC for spring break, I went to the grocery store to buy some stuff because we had Airbnb to make breakfast, and I'm walking down the frozen aisle, and I see that they have Cool House pints, and it was like 8 a.m, and I immediately deviated from my path and went over to see if they had the Cool House Sammys, and I was going to eat an ice cream sandwich for breakfast, but they did not have them. So I get what they're saying, that it's all the same, but I do think there is differences enough, and there is a premium on some of them. I would spend $9. I wouldn't get them a lot, but I would splurge every once in a while for a Cool House Sammy. So I picked that over Jenny's. Sorry, Jenny.
Yeah, but if any listeners want to share more articles with us, we'll be happy to talk about them on the podcast. But that's our last article for this week. What do you have for recommendations, Justin?
So we've talked about my lack of handiness over time, and then also my desire to delegate and hire things out. We finally found a good handyman. So my recommendation is, if you're not handy, find yourself a good handyman. We had this is embarrassing, 7 or 8 little things, nothing major. We talked about some of them before, but 7 or 8 little things that we finally got fixed all in a day. He ended up being a friend of my father-in-law, so that was helpful as well because we knew him, we could trust him. But I am so thankful to have him. So I know that if anything goes wrong, I don't have to wait 3 years to get it fixed. I can just call him and get it done right away and not let it build up. So find yourself a good handyman.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you found the person, but I guess it's through a friend of a family member, basically a referral. So I guess those are the best ways to find providers like that. Well, now that I passed the CFP exam and I actually have some of my life back, I've been able to consume some media. So I have a few recommendations this week. The first one's a nerdy one. So Peter Attia, who we've talked about on the podcast before, he interviewed on his podcast sleep scientist Matthew Walker, and Matthew Walker just came out, I don't know, it was a year or two ago with the Sleep book, and it was like a New York Times bestseller. So he's pretty popular right now, and the interview is so long. Peter's releasing it in 3 episodes. I've only listened to the first. The second one is out, and the third one is coming. But if you nerd out on that stuff, and now that I have the Aura Ring, it tracks my sleep. Listening to that was awesome. It just kind of brought it all together. And they talk about how sleep is going down for adults compared to the past, and it's going down over time. And they think that, he thinks that's having adverse effects on health and mental health and things like that. So it was really interesting, and it wasn't too in the weeds where you wouldn't, a normal person like me would understand it. So I thought it was great. The second one is Michael Lewis, who's one of my favorite authors, has a podcast now titled Against the Rules. And I don't know, have you listened to the first episode that he did? No,
I've not.
So it was his first episode was on reffing, and in the NBA, I guess Adam Silver's kind of brought reffing to the new age, basically. Then they spent $15 million on this replay center where they have refs inside to review all the plays at the end of the game, and I think it's at the last 2 minutes of each quarter. And even though that they've looked at all the statistics, and now they rank refs, and they tell them how good or bad they are, and they tell them their biases by studying all this data behind it, and they tell the teams which refs are doing a good job and which refs are doing a bad job. Their reffing abilities have gone up dramatically, and yet all the fans and players hate refs more now than they have in the past. And so Michael Lewis explores this and he interviews different people about it, and they look at the data. And I'll save the punchline. You'll have to actually listen to it, but it's super interesting. And he applies that to kind of how hating on referees in NBA games is actually seen elsewhere in America right now. And then the last one is I finally read a book that didn't have to do with CFP work, and it was The Stranger in the Woods, The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit. And I like adventure type stories, nonfiction. And this is about a guy who, like at 20, just walked into the woods of Maine, and he stayed there for 25 years. And until he got caught. And it's a pretty crazy story. It's a real short book, and so if you want it, you can crush it in a couple days. So I'd recommend that. I found it very interesting. But that's all I have for this week. Yeah,
that's all you have.
3 recommendations. I usually have 0 or 1.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, I'm going to cut the intro real quick because I have 6% battery life left on my MacBook, and we're going to lose everything. So I will have links to everything, and so will Kevin on our blogs. Check out allaboutyourbenjamins.com, ferventfinance.com for links to all of the articles and all the recommendations. All 3 of Kevin's will be there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the listener feedback with the recommendation on the Jenny's article. Would love to have more of those. So hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what you want to hear about. We'll incorporate that as well. So thanks for listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we will see you all next week.
Have a great week.